Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of the Empower Performance Podcast. Today's guest is Brazilian Jiu Jitsu strength coach and black belt Alex Sterner. Alex, if you're able to give a quick introduction, how you got into strength and conditioning, how you got into Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and what you do now.
Yeah, so first off, thanks for having me.
Mhm.
It's always good to talk to other professionals in the field. Yeah, so from my background, uh, I started wrestling and jujitsu way back in like 2004, 2005.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I was super skinny at the time. My freshman year of high school, I was about 5'10", and I wrestled at 119 and 125. Like grew really fast, even a bit past that, right? My sophomore year, I was, crossing 6 foot, and I was wrestling at 135 and 140. So like was really skinny. And freshman and sophomore year, I was starting to uh, delve in a little bit with lifting. I knew I needed to. Obviously, I was feeling, doing a combat sport. I was feeling the fact that I was a bit behind physically.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until really my junior year that it really, I started to get some traction. It's funny. As I started working and stuff, I told my parents, I was like, hey, I want to buy these supplements. I want to do whatever. And they actually took a really cool turn there where they were like, look, you can get supplements, but we want to make sure you know what you're doing. So
Mhm.
they negotiated with me, and they helped me out a little bit in terms of getting a personal trainer. And they're like, if you do a certain amount of time with him and you get him signing off on it, then you can actually get supplements. And that was kind of formative, right? Actually having structure and guidance to what I was doing. I started to put mass on, to the point where, my senior year, I was wrestling at 189 and 215.
Mhm.
Um, so, yeah, and I saw like firsthand as I started to actually structure workouts more sensibly, got really consistent with it, got really bought in. I saw the transformation within myself about how it
Mhm.
just made athletics that much easier. Um, and that continued. I, went to the University of Connecticut for college. Um, Initially applied to school as a political science major. Even in the summer between getting accepted and starting my freshman year, I'm like looking at the courses and stuff, looking at potential like careers, and I'm like, I don't think I want to do this. So switched to business because that was more, they had a solid business program. There's a lot of things you can do with it. And even like, after doing that for a while, I found out that, well, first off, I got my personal training certification one of those summers just because I was tired of making minimum wage.
Mhm.
Um, and then I noticed at the same time that UConn had a really good kinesiology program. And I was like, you know what? I don't love this stuff for business. I was in like macro and microeconomics courses and just didn't love it, and had really, due to my own firsthand experience, fallen in love with lifting weights, seeing the benefit in different sports. And then starting to share that with others, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to have another opportunity like this. So, uh, long story short, got into the strength and conditioning program there. Obviously, continued training and stuff, the whole time. And yeah, 2015, moved out to San Diego. Wanted to train with the best at Atos at the time. Um, Started competing with these guys. The goal was like, maybe if I still loved competing myself. I'd been training at that point for, 10, maybe even 11 years, and was like, uh, it would be cool if one day I could work with these guys in the weight room. And it actually just happened so much faster than I thought it would. Got started with JT Torres. That was a great experience. JT has this infectious positive energy for anybody who has met him. And, once I had his blessing, spread to a ton of the other guys, started working with all those top guys pretty quickly, and built a business around it. And so my gym now, we've had our own physical location since 2020. We train a bunch of the best jujitsu athletes in the world. It's great. We got mats down in the gym. We don't monetize classes or anything, but we're constantly doing rounds there. People are drilling, people are filming content. It's great. Built a life around it. Blended those two things, and Yeah, absolutely love it.
So I want to talk about a couple of those points real quick. I think if my math is correct, you said you went from 119 to 215 in the course of your high school career. It's almost 100 pounds. That's pretty remarkable. So if you ever need like some evidence that yes, puberty probably had an impact, but that strength and conditioning works, that's pretty substantial.
Yeah, I mean, there were obviously a lot of factors at play there. There was the fact
Right.
that, I was growing a ton and then
Mhm.
so, a larger frame, you're going to be able to put more mass on. Obviously, the
Sure.
strength and conditioning did help. Um,
Mhm.
puberty obviously helped.
Mhm.
Puberty also probably helped with the intensity and how much I, threw myself at the weights when I started to see that
Mhm.
progress. Like I was amped about it. I
Mhm.
was like, this is life-changing stuff.
Sure.
Um, yeah, and to be fair, I wrestled at, I got bumped to 215 a few times. I was a 189. But still, I mean, a substantial
Pretty,
amount of
pretty
weight.
substantial.
Yeah, and now, I'm 6'4", 230 now. Still pretty lean. So
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, very huge scale just from the
Mhm.
start of high school, to being an adult. And I did a lot of things. Um, I think there were some things I did well. There were times where I did things not so efficiently. Even the accessibility of information back then to now. Maybe this is like aging myself a bit, right? But, there was the era where you're getting any little tidbits of information you can from the muscle mags at the checkout counter to, when I was later high school, early college, like T Nation was everything. I'm on there reading
Yeah.
those articles. And, there was like an element of sort of like gatekeeping, right? If we
Mhm.
compare information access then to now, and what I mean by that is like on social media, if you've got some ideas for like solid camera angles, marketing, etc., you can build a pretty huge platform,
Yeah.
and anybody can do that if they have the right skills to do it.
Mhm.
Whereas, not anybody back in the day would be featured on something like T Nation, right? So
Sure.
information has gone through a pretty wild swing. And I've been around for, all of those different stages.
I think it's helpful now, but then it's also harmful in the sense that there's almost too much information and you get a lot of junk. And this is something I wanted to talk about later in the podcast, but we can kind of jump into it now. One thing that you do that I think is like really good is you see a lot of accounts where it's just reactionary content, or a lot of accounts where it's people just putting out their own content. You do a mix, but when you put out the reactionary content, it's not like what a lot of people do. It's kind of lazy. They try to jump on somebody else's hype train or their own creative content or anything like that. You actually if it's someone who's trying their best and they're misguided, you'll do it in a respectful, responsible way where you'll actually add context, which I really appreciate because a lot of people just be haters. And then if it's somebody like Moneyberg with, socks on the mat, or it's, functional patterns talking about how if you do my system, you'll live to 200 years old. If it's a grifter, you'll tear into them and you do it comedically, which I really appreciate. But if it's someone who you at least believe is trying their darndest, you're not going to try to ruin because we don't know everything. I'm still learning. I'm sure you're still learning. It's kind of a natural process. But I mean, early on, I thought things that even now, a few years into the industry, I'd look back on and be like, that's a little ridiculous. And if I got started and I was enthusiastic and some really educated coach just slapped me down, that'd be pretty shameful. But I think you do a really great job of balancing when to do it as building people up or just challenging their views on the basis of their views or attacking someone's character if it's worthy of being attacked.
Yeah, thank you. I think I like to meet people with sort of the energy that they meet me with.
Yeah.
And if something that I do keep in mind is this
Mhm.
element of in debate or philosophy, the concept of a deep disagreement, right? If
Mhm.
you and I have such different values, or we're evaluating information on such a different system that there really isn't a chance for a common ground, or if someone's doing something that that I would classify as unethical,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm gonna come at it a little bit differently than there are people that I think are just misguided or less experienced,
Sure.
or we've got like some of these like science-based lifters, quote unquote, that might have a little Dunning-Kruger involved, where uh, we do have a similar value system, right? If we want to
Mhm.
exchange PubMed IDs and talk about that and talk about how we weigh that versus our personal experience, I love those discussions. And I think that that warrants a different tone than someone who is making, you drop that line about living to 200 years or 300. Like they have
Yeah.
explicitly stated that. And I think it's harmful. I
Mhm.
think when you look at populations like people that are in pain, they're desperate to get out of pain. They want a confident answer. They want a simple answer.
Mhm.
And if someone's willing to give that to them, they will fall like head over heels for whatever that person has to say. And that's where I do view it as a matter of ethics, something that I do a lot with my in-person clients, with people online as well, people who talk to me in comment sections. If you're dealing with something, I'm not going to blow smoke up your ass about, some sort of magic fix. I do think there are a lot more things in our power when it comes to
Mhm.
injury or pain or these issues that people are plagued with and frustrated with and feel that they're
Mhm.
stuck in a cycle. And I think it's reassuring to know that we have some power over that. However, if you misuse that trust, sure, you can convince them to spend a lot of money on your stuff.
Mhm.
You can make a living that way, but I think that deserves being called out from someone who does have experience. And it's interesting though, you get a lot of pushback when you post negative content, right? Something that is not all happy go lucky. This is great. Follow this
Sure.
person. Everything they do is awesome. Likewise, I think the energy you put out there is something you get back. So there are people who get mad about that. There's people who like a lot of my educational stuff, and then they get rubbed the wrong way from things like that. But like you said, there's a lot of info out there nowadays, and I think again, I focus a lot on my in-person practice, and what I'm big with my clients is very few things are just a matter of accessibility to info or awareness. Where a
Mhm.
lot of us struggle nowadays is where to place our emphasis, our attention, and our focus. If we are scattered by all of these contradictory things and everyone's being
Mhm.
respectful and everyone's just creating their own content, no one's stirring the pot, no one's countering anyone else's claims, regardless of how insane they may be. Um, it leaves consumers very confused. It leaves them in a space where they don't know how to navigate it. Um, and yeah, I think it is valuable when you have an expert that can shine some light on that. And I think that that commentary is important. Similarly, I get critical stuff on my content all the time, and when it's critical about my information, let's have the discussion.
Sure.
Somebody tagged me in something that I think was made yesterday, or he tagged me in it yesterday. I don't know when it was made. And it was the dude hinted that in a future video he's gonna correct this dork, the dork being me. And it was about a clip that I made about Helen Maroulis, the Team USA wrestler. And a lot of that, I most of the time I feature my own athletes. I'll give commentary on other things that I see. And based on interviews and articles that were written about her when she took a little bit of like a foray into jujitsu, there were discussions about how her doctor recommended jujitsu. Um, and I thought that was an interesting angle of movement variability and load management with an athlete that's probably going to do something anyways, giving her an outlet that has some movement variability. So maybe she can work through some injuries. I think the guy is going, because based on one of the comments that went through, sounds like he's going to attack the fact that, as he put it, I said jujitsu healed her back. And I like, the guy was, he led with a personal attack, but that's okay. I think the discussion's important, and he said he's worked with her, so I think that's valuable. I'm going off of articles, interviews, etc. I wanted to give my commentary because a lot of people in the jujitsu space have also read those articles, and I wanted to shed some light on it. If it turns out that something that I said was based on something that wasn't true, I'll walk that back. I think focusing on putting out good content. I was working with the best that I had at the time, but if someone who was working with her says that that was different than it was, yeah, let's walk it back. And again, so anytime we're talking about ideas, I think that's important. The personal stuff can usually be done without, and I do, even with some of these charlatans. I try not to go too hard in the paint with that because I also think it's worth being aware of the fact that, if you have people that follow you, even if you are operating under a certain code, there's no guarantee that other people are going to, right? And sometimes it just becomes this bash fest. So yeah, I do really try to operate the vast majority of the time. I'm talking about an idea. And a lot of the times, even with functional patterns, I will discuss a topic they bring up. Let's talk about the topic. And I might bridge into the gap about how presenting this topic like this is unethical, maybe then it sounds like I'm, attacking their character and stuff. But I do think it's worth shining light on the language we use to speak to people who are in pain, how we drum up business, what we claim our services can and can't do. So yeah, I do try to walk that line. I do try to be kind of purposeful with it. And I also welcome it on my end. If there's something that I say that's wrong, I'll walk it back. There are opinions I've held in the past that I've called myself out on, because I think if we are constantly learning, evolving, taking in new info, being aware of new publications, new controlled data sets that might show things are a little bit different than how we've perceived them, we're going to end up changing our mind, and it's important to. So I think the discussion of ideas is good. It pushes the field forward. So that is a line that I try to walk. I'm glad that it sounds like it resonates with you.
Yeah, it's I think it's nice that you have this focus on like a scientific and philosophically ethical way of having these discussions. But then you also have a sense of humor, and I find I'm that way sometimes too, where it's like if I feel like it's worth it, I do want to have these conversations. I've had people post on like 10 straight YouTube videos of mine saying this is suboptimal for hypertrophy or this or that. I'm like, well, there's other adaptations than just hypertrophy. So I'm willing to actually like have a real response in that comment section. But I had a guy one time where I was doing like a wheel rollout and I was doing it on padded floors, but I didn't have an extra like 2-inch mat underneath my knees. And he said something like, put a mat on your knees, fuck face. I'm just like, oh, okay, well, that's not even worth a conversation, you know? Like, so it's like, whatever. I think if it's a situation where someone's being respectful, I'm willing to have that conversation. If they're not willing to, then I can block the comment, I can ignore it, I can respond. I try to not be petty and all that stuff, but I do like your humorous bits. You and your team do make some good comedic material, but then you also do have the scientific side of things. And I also wanted to compliment that as well. There's a lot of people in this field who are scientific, but they don't practice actually lifting properly. Um, some people lift, but they don't practice the science properly. And then there's also people in the performance realm that don't actually play sports. You're a black belt, you're scientific, and you actually lift weights. If anyone sees your profile and scrolls through a couple clips, they'll be able to see all that. I think that lends tremendously to being a better coach because you can understand and attack coaching from all angles as opposed to having one strength and avoiding your weaknesses. Can you speak to that? And do you find that there's any benefit in having all those bases covered?
Yeah, thanks. I want to, as much as I want to like take credit for that, those are just things I love doing, and I think that they
Mhm,
naturally just spill into one another. Now,
mhm,
um, I do think that lends a really useful perspective to be involved in sport, to
mhm,
train yourself, not just train yourself. I mean, dude, I'll bend and break rules myself, right? I also love
mhm,
training. I love flying a little too close to the sun sometimes. And I'm also transparent about when that blows up in my face a little bit.
mhm,
And I remain curious. I act on that curiosity, especially in my own training. And yeah, I do think it adds depth. I will say
mhm,
though, I think, and I'm not saying that you were trying to present it this way, but I
mhm,
think the emphasis of those things can sometimes manifest in a bit of a toxic way. And what I mean by that is like a lot of those people are like, oh, if you're a coach, you better look the part, you
sure.
better, and I think it can absolutely go too far. There are people with a
Mhm,
lot of knowledge, right? Like the best basketball coaches might not have been the best players, right? Like there's
sure.
limitations to that. But of course, you want a basketball coach that played basketball at some
Mhm,
point, right?
sure.
So yeah, there's limitations to that, but I do think that's important. And I think that when somebody is well-rounded in that sense, it keeps them grounded. When we stay just in the realm of theory,
Mhm,
and you don't notice the chaos that occurs in sport and everything, and you know, you might think you have a little bit more control over certain variables than you really do. Yeah, it just keeps you grounded. And again, I think when we talk about a truly scientific approach,
mhm,
it's not subscribing only to controlled environments. It's not
mhm,
only uh, basing opinions and thoughts off of a meta-analysis or a systematic
mhm,
review or a series of RCTs. It's
mhm,
also weighing that with personal experience. How does that illuminate what you're seeing? How does that maybe shine some light on the fact that you have some selection bias in the population that you're working with, or
mhm,
whatever that may be. I think it's valuable to have all of that. and also just experience working with people. I found it very frustrating as a coach in my 20s when there were older coaches that would dismiss experience just based on age. And I thought I
Mhm.
had, you know, some very unique experiences in my journey that gave me a bit of a fast track in terms of the experience I had working with people. I worked with 8 of the varsity teams in the weight room when I was a kinesiology student at UConn. I was just interning, but like, did far more than the required hours that we needed. Um, Once I was able to start working with the Atos team, I was immediately working with them. I was trying to recreate the D1 environment for jiu-jitsu athletes and train a whole team at the same time. I spent 2 years working for Brett Contreras and operating his glute lab in San Diego, where, man, that marketing machine of Brett's social media feeding clients into there, we saw an insanely high volume of clients. So
Mhm.
um, I feel like sometimes valuing some of these things might lead us to dismissing people based on age or whatever. So yeah, while I do respect that lens, and of course I believe in it because I live it and everything else, I do think there are limitations here where sometimes people take that stuff a little bit too far, you know?
Yeah, like kind of having a doctor in your title suddenly makes you, the most intelligent person on the internet, and you can dismiss anybody who's not a doctor.
Yeah,
So I totally understand that.
even if you had a really poorly written thesis.
Yeah, yeah. We don't have to go in that realm or anything like that. And also, he's bigger and stronger than some other very famous people in his field, and so yeah. So I know what you're
Yeah,
talking about. So along those lines, though, I think some people do care what you're talking about the height of all these things. For me, it's more about the pursuit of all these things. I guess that's more what I was referencing. You will actually roll, so you can actually understand to some capacity whether you were. 'Cause you talked about when you got your purple belt, people took you more seriously. Your black belt, they took you more seriously. But at least rolling, I think, is part of the thing that helps to understand what you're trying to help prescribe to your athletes, or to at least read one article. You don't have to have doctor in your title or something like that. I think at least the pursuit helps you to look at things in a better lens, and to be able to work with people in a better context, in a better sense. Um, so, for example, I'm definitely not at your level in terms of strength. You would crush me in a gym. Uh, I think you're more educated than me and have more experience than me. You're further along in your career, and then you're also a black belt, and I'm a white belt. But I at least think that doing all 3 things kinda helps me to be better than I was yesterday, and if I do it for a long enough amount of time, that helps me grow as a coach. So it's more the pursuit that I value than the actual status.
for sure. And I mean, dude, you said that you played soccer for a while. What level did you play soccer at?
D3, nothing crazy.
Not
Yeah.
okay, not nothing crazy, but like organized,
Mhm,
NCAA
mhm.
uh, soccer after high school. I mean, that is pretty high level athletics, and I think if you might downplay it because you are aware of what the gap may be between even like top D3 players and guys that
Sure.
ride the bench D1, right? Like, of course.
Mhm,
However, if we even look at something like jujitsu that isn't stratified in the same way.
mhm,
There isn't even, yeah, there's a belt system, but there isn't this like clear delineation of athleticism. It's not as like hammered out. Um,
mhm,
so you have really gotten your feet wet in terms of pursuing a sport, seeing how far it can go, seeing some of those limitations, those harsh limitations, right? Like you look at some of these guys that are potentially riding a D1 bench and they have some of these physical traits that you knew that dude was going to be special anyways, long before he was
mhm,
ever on that D1 team.
mhm,
So yeah, I even think that our relevant experience can bleed from one sport to the next. And I actually
mhm,
look, I don't know if you could tell, but I really like paying attention to other sports as well.
mhm,
And and allowing that to provide a sense of awareness to where jujitsu really is in this young fledgling state still. It's
mhm,
cool. It's cool how it's evolved a ton since I started.
mhm.
But yeah, all of that experience is super, super valid. And I think if you find appropriate ways to leverage that experience and to provide a better service to the people that you work with, the people that you share information with, yeah, that pursuit is super valuable.
I think going into the jiu-jitsu realm in that sense as well, I think it's interesting because you do have the belt system, but it doesn't always matter. You can have a blue belt who is a college wrestler and competes, and you could have a hobbyist, brown belt dad or something like that, and they could still have a pretty competitive role. It's not always as simple as I think white belt versus black belt. That's pretty much a lock. But if it's something like people are one or two belts away from each other, and there's a huge gap in athleticism, or a different combat sport, for example, especially grappling sport, maybe it'd be judo or it'd be wrestling. I think that definitely lends itself in that sense. And I understand that some people take issues with that when it comes to competition because they try to put people in the right brackets. And if you have experience in a different area, they think, oh, well, that counts. Should they be in an intermediate category if they're a white belt in jiu-jitsu, but they're a black belt in judo? Or, for example, you talk about strength. I don't know if it was you or someone on your team because I follow other people that you're associated with. But they made a post recently where the worst compliment you can get in jiu-jitsu is you're so strong. And was it you who made the post about like great technique on like a big lift or something like that? The strength matters, athleticism matters. Everybody says it's a little man's game, but I've rolled with this one guy who's he's my height. I'm 5'10", 150. He's 5'10", 250, and he's a former college wrestler. No chance. He's like my nemesis. I think he's a great guy. Like I can't do anything against him. You know, I'm just a living rag doll. So it all matters. People ask, does strength matter? Does technique matter? The answer is yes. It's not one or the other.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to go back to one of the earlier points you said
Sure.
there when we're talking about like brackets with different belt levels and stuff. I,
Sure.
I get it. There's a lot of commentary over it. But man, I view it a lot like on average, a sophomore in
Mhm.
high school is going to be smarter than an eighth grader, right?
Mhm.
But there are eighth graders that are
Mhm.
way smarter
Mhm.
than pretty much any sophomore, right? Like it happens. Does that mean they're not an eighth grader? Sure. Sometimes they can
Mhm.
take advanced classes and stuff, but like sometimes you just got someone who's gifted too, right? I think seeing a lot of these really good guys that especially went through like the juvenile system. I remember I was
Mhm.
there's like two textbook examples when we used to do camps with AOJ. I
Mhm.
remember Tynan was just getting into blue belt juvenile, right? And I rolled with him. And I was an adult at the time. It was towards the end of my blue belt stuff, and I had a good 50 pounds on him. He's still Tynan, dude. He's still I remember in the beginning of the round, I was like, oh, okay, this dude's a juvenile, whatever, and he worked me, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna turn it up a bit, and he still worked me. I had a background
Mhm.
in wrestling. I had weight on him. Not to say that those things don't matter, they do, but like sometimes someone is also just special, and Tynan all the way up through those belts, dude. Tynan at blue and purple belt was working the average black belt, working them,
Mhm.
not like having a
Mhm.
competitive round. He's beaten black belts,
Yeah.
and I had a similar example. When I first started training with the Rotolos, they
Mhm.
were kids. I remember there was a role that I had with Cade when he was still well in the juvenile belts, and he kept getting to like Estima locks and stuff on me, and I was able to like straighten my leg and get out of these positions just because I was so much stronger. But I was thinking to myself, like, man, when this kid starts to get any degree of man strength, like I'm in
Mhm.
trouble. And then I
Mhm.
remember another time before they popularized the buggy choke. It was one of the like right after I opened the gym here in 2020. They were just starting to get eyes on like, their runs in the trials and stuff.
Mhm.
And I still viewed them as kids, and I rolled with Cade and I sort of like passed his guard. I'm a lot bigger. And he set up a buggy choke and I just felt the pressure, right? And like I didn't know what was going on. This was before it got crazy popularized.
Mhm.
Um, and sort of felt like pressure. I'm in side control, so it felt like someone sort of holding the guillotine when you're in side control. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm just gonna place my chin on the ribs, and jokes on him. And dude, because it's like three of his limbs working
Mhm.
against the bat, man, my jaw popped like four times, and I couldn't close my mouth to chew for a week. So that was a moment where I was like, damn, he is not a kid anymore, you
Mhm.
know. So yeah, obviously those things play a role and stuff. And there are limitations to how well the belt systems can stratify people into different groups. But also sometimes you've just got these high achievers. And while strength and athleticism and stuff does totally play a role, at no point are we using that to downplay technique when there is a massive discrepancy in technique, right? That first time I
Mhm.
rolled with Tynan, I mean, not that it would be any different now, but he was way more technical than me, right?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, he had some disadvantages in that round. But dude, he was able to out technique those advantages. Again, when the discrepancy is big enough, you can totally make that work. So yeah, I mean, outliers exist. You're gonna have people at certain belts. It doesn't necessarily mean they're a sandbagger. I do think once they've already like won worlds at that belt level, if they're still there, then we could have that discussion. But just
Yeah.
because some dude's taking his first crack at purple belt and he's winning everything, doesn't mean that that dude is a sandbagger. I think people are very quick to
Yeah.
say that.
There's a competition, it's kind of relevant. There's a competition at a jiu-jitsu school. Can't remember which one it is, but it's basically a tournament where all the belts in any category compete, and whoever wins the tournament gets a belt promotion. And I think they do it once a year. And I think they say that if you win your competition, you get to join the next belts up. So if you're the winning white belt, you get to join the blue belt competition. And if you win that blue belt competition, they'll give you a two belt promotion. But they would cap it at two belt promotion. I'm curious your thoughts on that. If there's any validity to that rationale.
Um, yeah, so I guess this just boils down to people trying to fit certain definitions on or make a subjective promotion
Mhm,
something more objective, right? It's the same
mhm,
thing, except in a different value system when somebody has like a belt testing.
mhm,
There are people who have extremely simplified games that are black belts that may not have a massive wealth of knowledge
mhm,
that they can necessarily teach or whatever, but they're really good at the things that they do. And that doesn't mean that they don't deserve their black belt. And on the flip side, there's people who have lots of knowledge that might not necessarily have that competition acumen. I think when we look at something like a bracket as well and
mhm,
allowing that to determine a promotion, there's also the element of the bracket, how good that bracket was that day. I don't love that idea. And this is coming
mhm,
from somebody like, despite, it took me 20 years to get my black belt.
mhm,
I showed up at a competition school um, with a wealth of experience already. Granted, I was only at blue belt because a big portion of my training uh, career I refused to wear the gi at first for the first 7 years. I just didn't put the gi on, and the place where I came up had belt promotions. I thought it was stupid. I thought it should all be based on competence and what you do.
mhm,
I remember 2 years into jujitsu, I'd never worn a gi in my life. They were holding a belt promotion. I wanted to go and get my blue belt because I was beating blue belts, right? So I rented a gi from one of the instructors. Like he knew
mhm,
this is the first time I ever put that thing on, right?
mhm,
Part of the belt promotion was showing certain techniques, which of course I wasn't doing gi specifics to any of it because I'd only ever done
mhm,
no gi. Of course, I could do an armbar from guard and demonstrate that, but I'm not doing it with any sleeve grips or any. I'm just
yeah,
doing it with false grips and stuff like I would be doing in no gi.
mhm,
I didn't think that was such a big deal because when it came to the rolling portion, I submitted a few other dudes that were up for their blue belt that day, and then I submitted some blue belts. So I was like, all right, it's time to promote, and they're going. I'm like, here we go. I'm getting that blue belt, and they gave me two stripes, which is also crazy. Like I got two stripes the first time I put on my gi. As a black belt now, and someone who has calmed down a bit, that's
mhm,
crazy, right? First time you put on a
mhm,
gi, you get two stripes. That's actually
mhm,
really good. Me at the time, I was like, well, fuck belt testing, dude. This is
mhm,
stupid. It's just a money grab, whatever. I was an angry teenager, right? Um, so if you asked me back then, I'd be like, oh, that sounds great. I wish my academy did that. I wish,
yeah,
but also, now being under Andre and stuff, like the way that he is looking at things like belts, he's seeing you for who you are.
mhm,
And when you show a level of advancement from where you already are, he'll
mhm,
award you that belt, whether that occurs in competition or in training or whatever, right? So I think belts are subjective in nature.
mhm,
I think that's always going to be the case. I think if you make it too much based on techniques that you can recite and teach or whatever, that is an attempt to quantify it, right? And
mhm,
systematize uh your ranking, or if you're just doing it through some form of competition like that. But I think both are a little lacking. Like, sure, what if the dude, went through and won that bracket, and as his instructor, you've seen
mhm,
him perform better. You've seen him, yeah, he walked through some guys that he should have walked through. Great.
mhm,
And he didn't even show his bet. I think it's a matter when we look a bit more inward. And I always like to think of it as like growing into that next belt. I look at
mhm,
it as another form of self improvement. Something in the weight room uh, is brutally objective, right? If you want to hit four plates on your deadlift, four
It
plates,
moves or it
four
doesn't.
plates, yeah, there's some things you got to do for it, and it weighs the same every single day. Um, I don't think jujitsu is like that, and I don't think it should be like that. Now, of course, with it being less systematized and less objective, it leads to all sorts of misunderstandings, and people get upset not having their belt in a certain amount of time, whatever. I get it. I just think if we want to look at it where it could be the most rewarding to the individual who does it is this thought of like, what do I need to focus on in the realm of self improvement? How can I be honest with my game and like audit my existing strengths and my weaknesses? How do I plug those holes? Do I have a terrible guard? And should I spend the next month every single day in class, every single round, pulling guard to try to shore up that hole? Or do I just go, okay, well, I know I have a trash guard. I want to win every round. I want my instructor to see me winning every round so that he feels more inclined to give me a belt, right? I think when you assume the responsibility of your own learning and you are focusing on that self improvement, you're being brutally honest with yourself about what you need to improve. You're focusing on different areas of study. You're leaning on different people where you recognize they have a very good part of their game where you don't, and you're trying to pick up what you can. That's when you actually get that benefit out of it. And competition's great. I competed a ton, uh, from 2015, well, even before that, but since coming to Atos, 2015 through 2018, I was competing a ton. I think it's super valuable. I want to get back into competition. Um, and I like to think of that as just a snapshot of your progress, another chance to audit it, to really look at what you did under a microscope, to see if the stuff that you're training you can execute in a high stress condition, that you can adapt to the different scenarios placed in front of you. That's a part of the self improvement journey, I think, but I don't think that that's all of it. Super long winded answer. I guess I don't love the idea of the tournament like that, but I also don't hate it. The competitor in me is like, that's kind of cool. And the
Yeah.
16-year-old in me who didn't get his blue belt that day loves that idea.
So I want to go back to one of the things that you're talking about. You're talking about demonstrating techniques and showing actual like learning and growth, and that should be the main basis for belt promotions rather than I learned the techniques, but I can't actually implement them, or I can beat people up, but I didn't learn anything along the lines. Um, when I first started, I told you before we started the podcast, I got my MCL snapped, and I thought, man, I gotta learn as quickly as possible so I don't get injured. It happened on the takedown. My leg got kicked inwards, and then I just heard it and felt it pop and all that. And I thought, I don't want to be scared of this. I want to learn by, I reached out to my coaches. I said, "Are there anything that you can recommend?" They recommended Submeta. They recommended John Danaher's free course on BJJ Fanatics of solo drills. I read a book called White Belt Secrets by Chris Matakas. Um, so I looked into all these different things, and two things that stood out to me when you're talking about belt promotions. One was somebody said to John Danaher on a podcast, "What does it take to become a black belt?" And he said, "Not that much." And he was saying, "Don't sell yourself short. It's not the belt. It's the skills that you should be chasing." And he said, "There's purple belts in this gym that are better than some black belts and all that. And the belt isn't the end all be all." And then the other thing I was going to say about that is in that book I was telling you about, White Belt Secrets, very early on he says it's better to be a martial artist than a martial athlete. He creates these terms. And the idea is that a martial athlete only cares about winning. So they may never do anything outside their comfort zone and then just try to leverage their strengths and limit their weaknesses and beat up on the people they always beat up on, and it becomes an ego thing. And you have the other people, sometimes I roll with one of the black belts in the gym. I've learned really early on, I never actually get into a good position. He just allows me to put him in what's a bad position for him so he can learn how to get out of those bad positions. And that's like him just constantly trying to learn all the time, never taking a round off. If he's going to go someone more his level, he might take it less experimentally. But if he's going to go against a lower belt, he's going to, he might even let me be a inside controller in a full mount or something like that and start around like that. Get out of it and tap me in a minute. Like it's no big deal and all that stuff. And he's patient too. And so I can see that he's not trying to muscle. He's not trying to fight. He's not trying to win. He's just trying to think. And I think it's a great lesson. And I treat it the same way when I do MMA and we're doing, kickboxing. If I have my ego involved in the ring and I'm just trying to crush somebody's face, at no point am I going to think, should I slip? Should I roll? Should I teep? Should I do whatever? Should I circle out? I won't have time to think about that. But if I have my ego, I guess, out of it, then I'm able to think more critically, to be able to learn. It's a tricky thing, and that's one of the things I try to explain to people when I tell them about jujitsu and snapping my MCL. They're like, "Why do you do this?" To me, it's almost like meditation. It's the most present I'm ever going to be, because if I'm not in the moment, and if I am actually panicking, I'm going to get hurt. But if I'm able to be calm in a high stress environment and try to figure it out, that's as present as I've ever been, like basically in my entire life. So if you want to speak to, I think you kind of did with the whole improvement aspect, but if you want to speak to um, maybe what does jujitsu teach you as an individual? What lessons have you learned from it? That's what I've learned. Are there any that stand out to you?
Yeah, for sure. I think I do like to touch on the whole ego thing.
Mhm,
I think it's like demonized in jujitsu, and for good reason,
mhm,
depending on who you're talking to,
mhm,
because I, so there's a view that I like to look at as it relates to your journey in
mhm,
jujitsu, and I think that there's parts of it that people miss out on. I'm gonna kind of simplify it, but
mhm,
essentially, the first few times that you ever train, you ever roll, it's extraordinarily primal. It's very in your face. You
mhm,
oftentimes feel very helpless. You overexert yourself without even knowing, right? Because you're
mhm,
just pushing every button, trying to make stuff happen, and
mhm,
you end up in deep water. Um, and I think a lot of this rhetoric as it comes to like killing the ego or all these extreme things we hear about it is stripping back that primal response and
mhm,
trying to make it a bit more intentional and cerebral so that you can
mhm,
focus on those skills so you can actually build efficiency instead of putting max effort in all the time, and that is an important step early on in the journey.
mhm,
However, and if you look at uh, the way jujitsu developed, I think it allows us to map out those later stages as well, which is to then reintegrate that ego, that primal
mhm,
side back in. I think the reason competition is so valuable is like, can you execute in an extremely high stress position? And if you have actually killed your ego, you won't.
mhm,
Um, so so I think it's about then reintegrating that. And people talk about same thing like, whether it's like using strength or any other skill, like sorry, any other physical trait, having great cardio, flexibility, etc. You don't want an over reliance on those things early on, but
mhm,
you do want to leverage those things appropriately as you get better.
mhm,
So I think it's again taking responsibility for that learning process, knowing where you are in the game, knowing what the purpose of the thing you're doing right now is, or
mhm,
how you can get something productive out of a round at that point in time. So, like, you said that you're 150 pounds.
mhm,
If I rolled with you and chose that setting for me to be extremely primal, to use every bit of my strength and everything, that is probably not a good learning opportunity for me. But something
mhm,
that I like to do when I roll with people that are significantly smaller than me is I tone down the physical attributes so that
mhm,
I can still work on those transitions and everything else. And it's not a matter of removing my ego. There is still very much an ego there. I've just changed the rules of the game in terms of what I'm going to bring forth, the cards that I'm going to play, so that I can still get skill acquisition out of it. I can still get a productive round. Um, and with that, especially as you get better, if you're working with somebody who is a lot lighter than you or less skilled, making sure that the things that you do, you're moving efficiently and you're not just going, oh, I can't let this guy tap me and going
mhm,
gorilla panic mode, right? So I think it's more so about setting. And I
mhm,
think the people who really embody that quite well um, can sort of integrate those different physical traits more or less for an appropriate situation. So yeah, I don't ever think it's about like removing ego from it. I do think it's effective when we're talking to beginners who are just in there and whatever you want to call it, spazzing, not pacing themselves appropriately, not really learning, right? They're just
mhm,
struggling. Yes, we need to find a way to overcome that. Whatever language we have to use there, cool. But I do think there are people who get even further into it that aren't then reintegrating those elements back into the art. And I think
mhm,
that is a hindrance to their growth as well. I think having, you mentioned I actually love, uh, I might term it a little bit differently, but a concept I have with a lot of my friends is the idea of a nemesis round. And what I define as a nemesis round is somebody who's very close to you in a lot of those things, right?
Mhm.
They're not way more technical than you. You're not way more technical than them. They're not a whole lot bigger than you. You're not a whole lot bigger than them. Like it tends to be really competitive rounds for lots of reasons. And I do think in that setting, when you have an open round, we're not doing like situationals or we're not trying, you actually make that a very competitive round and you have a big time ego as it, you're like, I'm not gonna let this dude has a really good guard. I am not gonna let him sweep me. I'm gonna pass his guard today and lean into the ego. There is absolutely a productive time to do that. But then, yeah, it's not when you can't turn it on or off, it is a problem. And I do think some people get that hammered out of them so much that they stay in like the keep it playful mode, and then it prevents them from being as dangerous and fiercely proficient at brown and black belt as they could be. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think it's just a balance. I think it's a matter of knowing what's appropriate. Another thing that I really preach to people is training selfishly. You are there to get you better, right? And we all know
Yeah.
there are partners that have terrible body awareness. Maybe they're also bigger and or stronger than you. And something that I'm big on, something that I started to pick up, especially as like my career became a really big like centerpiece for my life. Like the first few years I was competing, I was working a ton, I was coaching people, etc. But I had a huge focus on competition. So like anyone who wanted to roll with me, let's have at it. Like let's go. Um, but as it started to take a bit of a back seat to my career, and I really had a huge focus on my coaching, I also realized that like those rounds are for me. And like there's certain people where I've noticed patterns where maybe they've got a mean streak with how they apply submissions. Maybe they have terrible body awareness and they just violently hip switch through your guard. And you're like, man, if my leg is in the wrong place, something bad's
Mhm.
going to happen. I got really unapologetically, like, I'm going to refuse rounds from people for whatever reason. I don't know you an explanation. I'm here to train for me. And I
Mhm.
think that's a really liberating thing too. I think that's really important for women and people who are on average lighter than their opponents.
Mhm.
Um, there are heavier partners you can get a lot out of your rounds with. There's also
Mhm.
heavier partners where you go into it and I'm getting nothing here, and there is this ever-present fear. Like I've seen the way this person moves. Maybe they have a track record of hurting other people.
Mhm.
I think it's very liberating to understand that you're there for your own selfish reasons, you're there for your own development, and where you choose to apply that ego or not is up to you. And yeah, not getting like pressured into I have to accept every round with everybody. So I think that's huge too. And understanding, that you have autonomy, that, there are some gym cultures that very much push against that. I think that's kind of toxic, right? We're
Mhm.
all there for our own reasons. And even someone like me who has prioritized competition a ton in the past, dude, I love a hard round. That's like if I had to sum up the thing that keeps me coming back, dude, I love the hard rounds. Love them.
Mhm.
But I don't let that love get manipulated to put me into positions that are not overwhelmingly good for me. So yeah, big on autonomy as well, big on like consent and choosing to roll when you want to. Also, dude, sometimes we're going through some stuff. And like going every round as some sort of like moral ideal just might not be appropriate for you. There is a point of fatigue where like not only are you not really learning,
Mhm.
but I also think like getting broken mentally is like people like wear that as like a badge of honor, but I think
Mhm.
that also builds habits. Like if you are constantly in a setting where you have to go every round, maybe you've come back from an injury and your physical preparedness is really, really low. You haven't kept up with cardio, whatever. There's some people who come in with other lifestyle habits. They're a former smoker, whatever, right? Like
Mhm.
that person, do they need to get broken every single class? Do they need to go into the gym with this anxiety? Like, shit, I'm going to have to
Mhm.
go every single round, right? Like, I think there needs to be a bit of nuance in there. And of course, there are the people who are lazy, right? They're sitting out rounds because they don't need to. They have a partner. And I view that, instead of turning it into something that's like a blanket rule for everyone, if someone wants to set aside time for class and choose to not take advantage of that, let that be their prerogative, right? So yeah, a lot of this stuff has in betweens. I don't think it's all one or another thing. And I do think that we're doing a really intense sport. So, focusing on different things for sustainability is big, because if you could rack up a couple less injuries in the first 10 years that you train, that might grant you an additional 10 years of training. And to me, that is pretty invaluable.
Speaking along those lines, you're talking about the primal side of things. You're talking about picking training partners. I think matching training intensity is a big thing, and then you learn real quick who you do like to roll with and who you don't like to roll with. Um, I've had a couple, people that go a little bit too hard. I had someone take like a chunk of skin out of my head with his nail because he was spazzing around. I've had one guy knee me in the head so hard that it cracked every bone in my, like every joint in my neck. I was like sore for a few days. I've had people, crank all sorts of submissions, joint stuff, and all that. And then I've had other people where it's like a 50-year-old dad who says he hasn't rolled in a while. He says, "Hey, is it okay if we take it easy and take it slow?" And it's almost like we're hugging for 5 minutes. Like it's not like anything too crazy. You can definitely match the intensity. If you like rolling with someone, you can roll with them more. If you don't have to. I appreciate you saying that because some people feel if they get called out by somebody, they can't say no, or they just have to roll with whoever's available. And then along the lines of the primal stuff, yeah, I'm a bit of a psycho. I don't come across that way, and I've tried to dial it back with time, be a little bit less extreme with my viewpoints, and having to go hard in competition in soccer. I loved slide tackling somebody more than I love scoring a goal. I kind of like that intensity and the grit and the fight. The scrappiness of it was probably my favorite part. Um, so when I roll in jiu-jitsu, I try to be a little bit more lenient. But when I'm in the MMA gym and we're rolling and you can be punched, you're not going to pull guard. You're not going to be gentle. At any point, you get popped in the mouth. That switch comes on just that little bit more, and then that whole like it's actually self defense sort of situation. Um, that kicks on, and then along the lines of ego too. I don't know if you follow Caleb Handley, Handley Performance. So he's a boxing guy. He's Australian. He worked with Athletes Authority. Really great guy. He does boxing and he does jujitsu as well. And we were talking about how it messes with your ego. Combat sports messes with your ego because you can beat somebody. You can have a really good day. Depends on who your partners are. Depends on what the skills practice is. You drive home. You're like, man, I'm a weapon. And then the very next session, you get paired with all the people that are way better than you. They kick your ass, and you're just like, it just puts you back down. So I try to never get too high with the highs. I try to never get too low with the lows. But it is kind of like a natural thing that you're gonna have a day where it's like, man, I'm actually learning, I'm growing, you're feeling good about yourself. And the next session, it's like, I suck, I'm trash. Like these guys are incredible.
Yeah, and after those hard ones, you've got like that long car ride home where you don't even turn on the music. You're just
Sure.
sitting
Yeah,
there,
for sure.
just you and your thoughts, and they're not good, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something to that. I think there's value in both.
Mhm.
And again, like, even the talk of like having autonomy and stuff like that, like there is benefit to having really hard rounds. Or even like you
Mhm.
mentioned the ones of someone like going too hard.
Mhm.
There's value there too, because even though they're going too hard, uh, most people don't experience that ever. So again, we're
Mhm.
talking about combat, we're talking about self-defense. Now, I'm not saying to throw yourself into that all the time, but I also, don't think that the absence of that entirely is beneficial, because the whole point is that we're trying to be able to do this under duress.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's definitely value to both. And then even just from a personal growth and development, from an emotional standpoint, yeah, having both of those, a lot of people see value in the confidence boost that they get from that stuff,
Mhm.
right? They work really hard, they put a ton of work in, and then they have that really good day. And that bleeds into other parts of their life in a very productive way, right? Because for a lot of reasons, uh, could be social anxiety, could be depression, could be a host of things. And you have that thing where you worked really hard for it and you feel the fruits of that hard work in, again,
Mhm.
a very in your face primal way. That
Mhm.
confidence is invaluable for people, and I think that's huge. And then on the
Mhm.
flip side, you got some people who got to be knocked down a peg or two, and then they train and they do they experience that.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think both are valuable. And I think both teach really good things. I wouldn't take it as far as some people saying that, like, getting to a black belt weeds out all the bad people, because we know that that's not true either. But there are elements of truth to that, right? Like
Mhm.
having those humbling days, it's good for you, dude. It's good to
Mhm.
know that like you're not that dude. I think
Mhm.
that's a very healthy thing for males in particular to experience. Um, so yeah, I think both of those are great. And yeah, both have their own host of benefits. If, like you said, you don't let the highs get you too high and you don't let the
Mhm.
lows weigh you down too much. Because
Mhm.
also, not only do those both happen in isolation, sometimes you get a stretch of one of them, you know? And
Mhm.
especially when it's a stretch of those low days, you kind of you learn something about yourself, right? You keep
Mhm.
showing up, and you pull yourself out of that. I think that's valuable, knowing you can take your knocks, and you don't know like, okay, by next Wednesday I'm gonna start winning rounds again. You don't know. You have no
Mhm.
idea. You show up again the next day and you're like, I hope today wasn't like yesterday, and it is. I think there's something really powerful when we talk about a lot of like the mental health benefits that come with jujitsu. It's
Mhm.
taken some of those knocks. And then also knowing like it's kind of crazy too. You have one of those rounds, or sorry, one of those days where every round is just brutal. You're
Mhm.
losing to guys that you normally hang with. You know what I'm talking about. You're just taking your knocks. But it's kind of crazy how then that like puts perspective on things. Like that looming bill that you have, you're like, I'll be able to handle that. Like all of these other
Mhm.
things that you were so wound up about after you just get your face dragged across the mat for a couple hours, you kind of sit there and you're like piecing yourself back together and you're like, that stuff's not so stressful right now. Again, I think there's definite benefits to that stuff. And then you talked about being present. This is kind of a slightly different angle, but I've found that I'm addicted to the things that demand my presence. Something like jujitsu, there's no scrolling in between. There's no like being distracted. Like you are sucked into the present moment. And personally, I've always been addicted to things like that. I did, a couple years of rock climbing. Same thing. You're not halfway up, a challenging wall, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, let's see what's going on Instagram. Like you're in that moment, and really nothing else matters at that point in time.
Mhm.
I got into riding motorcycles a few years ago. Same thing. Like you are very focused on what you're doing. And I love stuff like that. I think things like that, obviously, we don't need to categorize the benefits of riding a motorcycle similar to a combat sport, but things that draw your whole presence, are valuable, especially in a day where a lot of us have a job where that's not the case, right? A lot of people who are on calls all day, where they can just silence themselves and they can be over here just scrolling. They're not fully present. They could go a full 24 hours and not have any stretch where they are fully present. I think that's very valuable. And as a reset as well. I don't know about you, but I find myself immediately after a class, I'm not looking for that next dopamine distraction. I'm not looking for that thing. You know what I mean? We're at like this different wavelength where we can breathe and just be with that breath and not to be all like woo woo hippy dippy about it. But I think that's a very good thing for you. And jujitsu gives that to you in a way that a lot of other things can't. Even lifting, right? When you get far enough into lifting, I can get distracted between sets. Sometimes, I know it's not going to be a crazy day, so I dial it back. And afterwards, I don't have that like harsh reset because I purposefully didn't crush myself in the gym. Sometimes it's not up to you in jujitsu. You think you're going in for what's an easier session, and two rounds
Mhm.
in, you're like, nope, this is not an easy day. And again, outside of the realm of something like load management, just for the mental benefits, I think that can be very valuable. And I think that's why so many people get addicted to it, right? You love having that uh, release, that thing that is separated. You're not thinking about those other responsibilities. You're not thinking about anything. You're for that hour or hour and a half or 2 hours that you're there. That is your sole focus. And I think that's good for us. I think it's good to have that separation.
I agree with that. I wanted to go back towards strength and conditioning a little bit if we can.
Hmm.
And I kind of wanted to tie your idea of it's okay to have those hard rounds similar to how you talk about injury and you talk about certain exercises in the gym that a lot of people will fearmonger. So, for example, you'll search your deadlift and you'll see a lot of people who will say, oh, that's bad for your back. And a response that perhaps you may have is, no, that's bad for your back because of progressive overload. You've worked into that range and you've worked up to that weight. Over time, you actually have a more resilient back. But then as well, you talk about injury, and you mentioned chaos earlier in the podcast. I saw your post today. I think this is great, and I also saw the post you made a little while ago about your adductor strain and how you're rehabbing that with the exact exercise that hurt it. You hurt it doing a Zercher squat, and you started doing that to get back into it. That's one of the things I think is most valuable. I understand why you kind of critique people who say do this and you'll never get injured, because that is a lie. You do a good job of saying this is real, this happens, especially if you push yourself hard enough, whether it's jujitsu or weightlifting. The body is not bulletproof. That's my pet peeve word is bulletproof. Um, so I like that you actually you talk about resiliency. You don't fear monger, whether it's with jujitsu based off this podcast, whether it's with the weight room and all that. And you also like to simplify things. I appreciate that as well. Um, there's a lot of complex stuff in this realm. You have seen a lot of it just from scientific studies and analysis. It is so easy to think, man, I got to throw the baby out with the bathwater and never do this one thing again because this study said this is 5% better than this alternative. And you really just break down workouts to, uh, a squat, a hinge, a push, a pull. You do power in the beginning and you do cardio or accessory work at the end. You make that very, very simple. So I appreciate that you're somebody out there that's making things simple and also having a healthy message around injury and around training with certain exercises, should they be demonized or not. If there's one route you'd rather go down, if you want to talk more the injury side, or you want to talk more the simplification or the exercise, should it be demonized? I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of those subjects.
Yeah, I think let's just look at it in the realm of injury and empowerment.
Mhm, mhm,
There, it's so easy to fall into a feeling of helplessness as it relates to injury or as it relates to age. Feeling like you're helpless to those things happening to you, not knowing how to identify what things are within your control and what you can sort of stave off with a stick. And I think when we have something available to us, when we
mhm,
have that thing within our control that we can work on, it breaks down these things and makes it where we don't feel powerless to them.
mhm,
And really that powerlessness, that hopelessness is the biggest issue. If we use an analogy like jujitsu, right? If you have somebody that is so much better than you, or maybe it was just so early on that you go in and you don't even know what grips to look for. You know that you're just going to sort of freeze or you're going to overexert on
mhm,
something that you don't believe in or whatever.
mhm,
That sucks. It's really cool when you start to hit that first inflection point in jujitsu where you're like, okay, this dude's playing guard. I'm going to make these grips. I'm going to make this sleeve grip, and I'm going to start to work on this pass. That moment of taking action is so big in terms of our outlook and self efficacy and just like not being depressed about shit, right? The same is true as it relates to an injury. When you are a white belt at getting injured, you're helpless. You're like, man, all you can find yourself attached to is what you were capable of last week before this happened. And you're just
mhm,
living in the past and you're going, why me? Why did this happen to me? Things that are not productive. Imagine if after you get swept, your immediate thought is, why me? What do you mean, why me?
mhm,
Why is that even? Of course, you're going to get swept. You're doing jujitsu. Of
mhm,
course, you're going to experience pain and injury. You're a biological creature. If you've ever had a dog, dogs get hurt, right? Now, dogs can't really do all that much about it, and who knows how much they're even thinking about it, right? But animals experience pain. It's a feature, not a bug. We can do something about that. We can do the equivalent of like learning what grips to make, right? We can take productive action. And when you can do that, this scary, helpless scenario breaks down a little bit. We focus on that next step. I like to really zoom in on any single training session, right? And as a coach, this will make sense to you. If someone's listening and maybe they just lift recreationally, this might be a newer concept, but it's so empowering. When I walk into the gym on any given day, I'm assessing exactly where I'm at that point in time, right? My all-time deadlift record. I'm going to deadlift today, right? I am not deadlifting off of what I did 2 summers ago when I
mhm,
peaked on a deadlift specialization program. That just doesn't apply to me right now. I am assessing where I'm at right now, and I'm focusing on the step that I can take today for self-improvement. That's it. And when we zoom in like that on any single training session, injury, no injury, like, okay, let's say I'm dealing with a finger injury from jujitsu, and I'm looking at where I'm at right now, and I've got a deadlift day. I'm gonna throw straps on today. I'm just going to do that. I'm not even going to think twice, right? I'm going to make that change and go about it. Maybe I can't do a motion. Okay, well, what can I do? What if in jujitsu, I want to make this sleeve grip to set up this sweep. Okay, what if you can't? What do? You adapt, right? What can you make a grip on? You got to make your 4 points of contact. Make them somewhere, right? It doesn't need to be the perfect, like one of the first things in jujitsu when you're playing guard, make 4 points of contact. Oh, but what if it's not perfect? Make 4 points of contact, right? It's the same thing with injury. Like assess what you can do right now. You can do something short of a CNS injury, right? Concussions are different, right? We're not looking at what we can get away with. We really need to take care of that, right? That's different. And an injury, not to your back per se, but to your spinal cord, we're going to treat those differently. Okay. Those we're going to be way, way, way more conservative. It's not about what we can do right now, especially in the acute phase of that injury. But any other injury, if I were to break my femur today, tomorrow, I will enter the gym and go, what can I do today? Well, tomorrow's a squat day. So if I break my femur today, I'm not going to squat tomorrow, but I'm going to do something. And you know what? I'm probably going to do a single leg squat on the other side. I'm going to do some cross education. I'm going to focus on the healthy side. When you zoom in like that and you just assess where you are and you get in the habit of this, assess where you are and train for what is appropriate for you in that setting, all of a sudden this attachment to what we did last week or last year, all of these things melt away. Make the assessment, gather some info, maybe ramp up. If your back's feeling a little bit cranky and you've got like squats that day, start with your warm-up sets, right? Ramp up. Okay, how did 135 feel? Man, 135, it felt a little bit more cranky and it felt slower than it normally does. Cool. Use that info to select the appropriate load for that day. It's a really simple concept, but it's a habit that we need to get in. And when you do get in that habit, this like catastrophizing different injuries and stuff sort of melts away. You're just doing the same process. When I hurt my adductor, I was like, okay, the first thing that I know I need to be able to do is a bodyweight squat. And for the first 2 days, that was not possible. I was holding on to handles. I was doing like a Hatfield squat, but without the safety squat bar.
Oh, wait, yeah.
Exactly. I was doing a less than bodyweight squat. Just assess what you can do and do that. Another thing, when I felt the pain, when I felt the actual and heard the actual tear, it was adductor magnus. So it's like it's running right next to those hamstring fibers. At first, I was like, if you were to watch the whole video, Rodrigo was right near me and I'm just like, dude, I think I just tore like my hamstring or my adductor, and thinking it through, like squatting doesn't make sense to tear your hamstring. I was like, okay, it's probably my adductor. And so I further evaluated that same day. There's in the next complex over, there is a hamstring curl machine. And I went over and I tried that to assess like, okay, was this hamstring or not? Did a hamstring curl just fine with even heavier loads? I'm like, okay, hamstrings ruled out. I hurt my adductor, right? Like, come up with a plan, and you don't have to have the same level of knowledge or anything else. Like, it's just like if a white belt is coming up with a plan to how to pass the guard, how to assess where they are and what, like, they don't need to know every pass. Like, what do you know? What can you work through and work through it? And the last bit of that is feeling like we have to tread a perfect path. Recovery is not a straight line. You're going to misstep. I like to use an analogy of solving a Rubik's Cube. If you wanted to get good at solving a Rubik's Cube, or just in this moment in time, solve a Rubik's Cube as quickly as you could, is really wondering before you turn it every time if this is the perfect move, is that helpful? No, dude, that's not do it. And then go, well, okay, that wasn't it. Go back. I think a lot of times people become crippled by fear with an injury that, oh my God, if I do something wrong, I'm gonna make it worse. And I'm not here trying to say that you can't make injuries worse. Of course you can. But the weight room is the most controlled setting that we could possibly be in, right? We talked about like the chaos of sport, of something like
Sure.
jiu-jitsu. If it hurts to pick up a 30-pound dumbbell, well, guess what? We're not going to do that day. We're not picking up the 30-pound dumbbell, right? And if you were picking up the 20 and that was fine, and then you get to the 30 and you're like, uh-oh, okay, put it back down. Even if it sets you back slightly, you have a little bit of a flare up. I mean, that is a part of it, and you're learning something. Just like in jiu-jitsu, the goal is not, okay, here I am day one. All right, I'm going to get swept less than any other human ever. Like, that's not a helpful thought. It's like, okay, when you do get swept, what did you identify? Why'd you get swept? Oh, well, they had both of my pants as grips. Okay, we identified something. Now, how do we make it where the next time around they don't get both of your pant grips, right? Are you learning from those missteps? It's not a matter of not doing them. It's just a matter of learning from that process and being somewhat having some sort of like decision making process or method to like how you're going to take that next step. And don't fear taking a misstep. As long as you don't take as big of a step as you can, the missteps that you'll inevitably make will just be minor setbacks. And then you just get back on the horse, right? So like, go if that 30-pound dumbbell hurts, okay, going from 20 to 30 or 25 to 30. Well, we found the exact line where it hurts. We're going to back off there. Even if that sets you off, it's not like you jumped right to the 60. If you jump right from the 20 to the 60, maybe that's not the best call when you're hurt. So to reel all of that back in, just the empowerment of injuries are going to happen. When they happen, finding a way to just assess where you're at right now and focus on that next step you take. You take the step. If you have to readjust, readjust. If you don't, if that was a good step, then the next day you focus on taking that next one. Then I think breaking it down into that process, lining it up between the other things you do. I use some analogies between jiu-jitsu because we both train. I do this with my athletes all the time. They understand that element in jiu-jitsu. We're just taking that same process and applying it to bouncing back from this injury. And that breaks us down from this fear, this I can't do anything. I'm gonna rest for 2 weeks. Bro, don't rest for 2 weeks, right? You popped your MCL. Did you just lay in bed for 2 weeks?
No,
Right? Like,
I got right into it. Yeah.
yeah, you worked on it, right? And did you do it perfectly? No, dude, like the first time that I was learning to pass the guard, I didn't do it perfectly. Now I've got a pretty good repertoire of guard passes, right? You might not have done the MCL injury, or you might not have dealt with it and rehabbed it perfectly. However, you did ultimately get there. And now, if it happens again or something similar happens, you've got a better tool set to be able to work on it. So now, if anything, the next injury that rolls through is actually a little less scary. You got a stripe on your belt. You know what I mean? You leveled up a little bit. And dude, the same was true with me with that adductor. Even though I'm better at dealing with injuries, far better than I was in the past, I'm still learning stuff, right? There were things I did well. There were things I could have done a little bit better. And I just took that in stride. And the next time something crops up, I've got more answers.
Going along that, I do want to speak about the hopelessness thing. I also love that you use the word empowerment because it's the Empower Performance podcast. My business is called Empower Performance. That's a word I like, and that's what I try to teach my clients. That's my major mission. If I can teach them enough about training that they never need me again, then I feel like I did my job properly. Um, and I want them to. My biggest win is when they say that they were able to do something they couldn't do before, or that they trained without me giving them a plan or something like that, just because they wanted to train. For me, those are the big wins. Or they pick up a different physical activity or hobby. Um, just stuff like that. That's the main reason why I do this. That's the big win for me. Um, but I did feel hopeless in high school when I got an injury my senior year, and not that I would have gone D1 or anything like that, but I had a couple schools looking at me, and that was right when they were going to start watching me playing tournaments and all the stuff. I was speaking to them. So when I went D3, it was to the only school that had an offer at that point in time before my injury. So I went there. My mindset was just awful. I was really upset. I was like, this is going to just derail my career as a player and all that stuff. It really beat me down, affected my mood as a person. And then with the MCL, I decided to be a glass half full person. And I think it's even important to mention if it's a glass 25% full, it's still helpful to do that in the sense that I could have just felt sorry for myself for all the things that I wasn't able to do anymore. But instead, I was like, man, what can I do? I'm going to spam it as much as my body allows in terms of recovery, having the awareness during the session, immediately after, the day after, the days after. If all I could do is ride a bike and do it on just the bottom half of the pedals, not even doing a full cycle or something like that, and then eventually building to the point where I have full knee flexion and I can do it with the seat lowered, then I was thinking, all right, that's awesome. I'm gonna crush that. I'm gonna have a bike in front of my TV. I'm gonna watch TV. I'm gonna do it for an hour a day if I need to, whatever. Or I would look at a leg extension machine, and that was like my new thing. Once I can like do a single leg extension on my injured leg as much as I could, a strong leg, I was like, this is my goal, and it was very empowering to think not only that, but like you said, you hurt one adductor, you didn't hurt both of them. You still have your core works fine. You can find variations where you don't need to use your adductor to train your core. You have 3 working limbs. You might as well train that. So with clients, yes, it is good for the business model to have them train when they're injured. But I also tell them as well, if you want to achieve your goals, if you hurt your right leg for 3 months, you don't train at all. And then you hurt your left leg for 3 months, you don't train at all. And then you hurt your left arm and then your right arm. You want a whole year without training. But if you hurt your right leg and you train everything else, and then you go to your left leg, you train everything else, and you keep doing that, you're still going to be able to make progress and achieve your goals. It's not going to be a hard reset or even working backwards. And the main thing I try to tell them is avoidance of stress is, in my opinion, worse than uh, uh, the stress itself or resiliency or anything like that. So my dad, for example, I've told this story on the podcast a few times. He had back pain for many, many years. And when I first started training him, I had a kettlebell that was about 40 pounds. And he was like learning to deadlift. So I taught him how to do a hinge just with that kettlebell. And he's like, "Ooh, I can feel a little bit of sensitivity. I don't want to ever lift heavier than that." And the sensitivity was just his spinal erectors working for the first time in forever because he just never faced any of those stresses. And I didn't try to fearmonger, but I just tried to say to him, I was like, "Oh, God forbid you pick up a 50-pound package because your body's not prepared for it. And you're going to have to do that in life. You're going to have to pick things up. Things will happen." And so I said, "I'll make you a deal. As long as this feels like it's a 7 out of 10 intensity, we'll stay at this weight. Once it feels like it's less than 7 out of 10, we go up just to 45 or to 50." And we stuck with that long enough that, in his 50s, he was pulling 275, which I was proud of, going from 40 to 275. But the most important thing is his back pain disappeared. No more back pain. And anytime he has just the slightest little thing here or there, he's not scared of it anymore. Kind of like what you're saying, any kind of injury, not just back pain, but could be anything else. If he has any kind of sensitivity, he's not scared. He's not going to shy away from physical activity. He's just going to find what he can do. And to me, that's the most important thing. You can teach people, yeah, hit PRs, yeah, it helps with your performance, all that. For me, it's the teaching people valuable lessons when it comes to health, nutrition, the relationship with exercise. That's the main thing. I have a wrestler, and like, he doesn't want to compete in college. He's a talented wrestler. Doesn't want to compete in college. Doesn't want to go at a high level. So cool. If he wins states, he was a state runner-up last year. If he wins states, awesome. But the main thing that would be a win for me is, did I make him enjoy training enough and have a good enough fundamental understanding that he's still training at 30, 40, 50. His kids see him train. His kids are training. Um, I know I went off on a little bit of a rant, but I really appreciate you using the word empower. It made me think of that, and then just also talking about why you teach like rehab in that sense, or just like kind of return to play, or just strength training without the fear of injury. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think, man, self-efficacy is such a uh it has such a like beautiful residual or like effect that bleeds into every other part of your life.
Mhm.
And the lack of self-efficacy does the opposite. It's this black hole that eats away at you. Um and I think allowing somebody or being the conduit that allows
Mhm.
them to realize that they're capable of something like that is really fulfilling for what we do. But to speak more from someone's perspective who might be listening,
Mhm.
when we so it's crazy. I have a uh, my son actually today. My son turned 15 months, and like right now, he's like,
Congratulations.
yeah, thanks.
Mhm.
He's like getting into like walking and stuff, right? He is walking, but he's like not too graceful right now, right?
Mhm.
And when he's trying to do things, like as a kid, I love that childlike state where it's not
Mhm.
like, oh, can I do that? You just
Mhm.
try it and fail and try and fail. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of us, I think when we actually get old
Mhm.
is when we are afraid to be bad at something again, or just like work ourselves into a box and say, well, I'm not capable of that thing anymore. Like, dude, trying and failing isn't like a sin. I think it's what keeps us young. It's what allows us to learn new skills. And in the realm of the weight room, it's what allows us to find that, so many people say, oh, 30, you're over the hill, 40, you're over the hill, 50, oh God, you're so old. Realizing how adaptable a human body with a pulse truly is, again, it is an empowering thing. You look at life differently. Instead of just getting to some arbitrary age and being like, well, I'm decaying now. That's it. Things are only going, it's all downhill from here. It's not all downhill from here. Like, what are you talking about? Man, I love the fact that there are so many different avenues to train. um, People will talk about like, oh man, like one day you're gonna set that last PR and deadlift. Okay, yeah, sure. Maybe I'll crush my best 5K time. Maybe I will. Like the list goes on and on. Like you can work on stuff. And I think focusing on that adds a level of youth into anybody's life, which is something that otherwise we'll just dry up. It's so good for our brain to learn a new skill, to recategorize the things that we are and aren't capable of. There's a book on skill acquisition. It's actually, I don't know how much you look at like the ecological dynamics or eco for jujitsu versus traditional stuff, but the source material that Greg Souders references, how we learn to move
Rob
by
Gray, right?
yeah, yeah, right here.
Yeah.
There's some really cool chapters in there about how self-efficacy influences our sensory environment. Climbers who are more skilled will estimate that a crimp hold that they see is actually bigger than it really is. It looks bigger to them because they know they can use it. And on the flip side, climbers who are less good at climbing will look at a hold, and if you ask them to estimate how big it is, they estimate that it's smaller. Our sensory environment isn't even objective. It's influenced by what we think we can do. And that's our sensory environment. That's the things we see and stuff like that. Imagine how that bleeds into other elements of our life, more abstract things, right? The way that our emotions are influenced. There's another study that he references in there where they stand at the bottom of a big staircase. I want to say it was like outside of a subway or something, and they're interviewing different people about and asking them to estimate the slope of the stairs. The younger and more athletic people were, the less steep
Yeah.
they perceived the slope to be, and the older and less capable you were, the more steep you perceived it to be. Like, so I think when we
Incredible.
look at things like that, and we look at the like a word like empowerment, you are actually changing somebody's world if you are making them more capable, or allow it, again, being the conduit for them to find out that they're more capable or to grow stronger and become a more capable person. It influences everything. I think that also goes back to what we were talking about like, some of those interactions online, right? If somebody is like, oh man, my back hurts just seeing that, like that is their world being shaped by their experiences and lack of capability. You're not going to see some like world-class gymnast who is incredibly physically literate and capable going around commenting shit like that. They believe they can do anything because they're working on that all the time. So why would they even speak that? So yeah, I think that as it relates to injury, capacity, all of these different things, they are uh again, this seems like sort of like woo woo and like hippy dippy, but like it influences everything, our mental environment, our sensory environment, our emotional environment. And being more capable just feels better. The world's less scary. Yeah, and I think that's powerful. And I think that any way that you can show somebody that they are capable of that is a beautiful thing.
Um, I really appreciate everything you said. I appreciate your time. I want to respect your time. I think that's a what a like wonderful place to leave the podcast. I could easily, if you had the time, take up 3 more hours talking to you. I got a bunch of questions, bunch of stuff. This has been an absolute blast. If you ever want to be back on the podcast, you get a free pass whenever you want. It'd be an absolute delight. If you want to plug yourself, your business, any of that to anybody who's listening.
Sure. Yeah, my Instagram is alex.sterner. My business, which is focused on strength and conditioning for jiu-jitsu, is electrum_performance. And we're also on YouTube at Electrum Performance. So yeah, and then always, I like to be approachable. Reach out. You got questions, ask them.
I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Of course. Thank you for having me.